The Department of Xenological Bewilderment, or DXB, as it had become known throughout the Federation, was not originally intended to be a permanent institution. When humans first made contact with the galactic community and presented their Humanity Starter Kit, an extensive collection of Earth's culture, history, science, and media designed to introduce humanity to the stars, the Federation's council believed that a small, temporary research group would suffice to analyze the materials. That was 27 Federation standard years ago. Now, the DXB occupied an entire wing of the Science Academy on Alpha Cent Prime, employed over 300 researchers from 72 species, and was still no closer to fully comprehending what exactly made humans human. The problem, explained Dr. Xylith, the Andorian xenoanthropologist who had reluctantly served as the department's director for the past decade, is that everything in the starter kit contradicts everything else in the starter kit, which then contradicts everything we observe in actual humans. The blue-skinned scientist gestured to the holographic display dominating the center of the conference room. It showed a chaotic web of connections between thousands of data points, resembling less a scientific model and more an explosion in a spaghetti factory. A human food reference Dr. Xylith had picked up despite her best efforts to maintain objective distance from a research subject. Every time we believe we've identified a pattern, a fundamental principle of human behavior or psychology, we discover a significant percentage of humans who operate in precisely the opposite manner, yet all consider themselves perfectly normal representatives of their species. The quarterly review committee shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Vulcan representative, Tpar, raised a perfectly manicured eyebrow. Perhaps, she suggested with characteristic dry precision, the department's methodology remains flawed after all this time. Logic would dictate that after nearly 3 decades, some consistent framework should have emerged. Dr. Xylith's antennae twitched irritably, a reaction she'd long since given up trying to suppress during these reviews. Yes, well, we've cycled through 17 distinct methodological approaches, including 3 developed specifically for this research by the Federation's most accomplished theoreticians. The issue isn't our methodology. The issue is that humans themselves operate on contradictory principles. They are, as far as we can determine, the only known sentient species whose psychology exists in a perpetual state of quantum superposition. This led to an outbreak of murmuring among the committee members. The Tellarite representative snorted loudly, but Dr. Xylith pressed on, determined to justify the department's continued existence and funding. Over the past year, we've been pursuing 3 primary theoretical frameworks that might explain the uniqueness of human cognition and culture. If I may introduce the research leads. The committee chair, a stately Gray's-Right with impressively curled horns, nodded reluctantly. Proceed, but please be concise. The committee is scheduled to review 14 departments today. Dr. Xylith gestured to a lanky Trill standing nearby, who bounded forward with an enthusiasm that made several committee members lean back instinctively. Dr. Jazra Dex, 304th host of the Dex Symbiont, specializing in mimetic information transfer patterns, Dr. Xylith introduced. Delighted to be here, Dr. Dex exclaimed, immediately activating his own presentation overlay. My research team has been developing what we call the parasitic meme hypothesis. It's really quite fascinating. The display shifted to show scanning imagery of human brains alongside complex data patterns labeled as memes. Our analysis of the starter kit revealed that humans transmit and replicate cultural information in extremely unusual ways. While all intelligent species share information, humans appear uniquely susceptible to self-replicating information patterns that propagate regardless of factual accuracy, practical utility, or even coherent meaning. Dr. Dex was practically bouncing on his toes now. We believe these memes, a term actually coined by humans themselves in their pre-contact literature, function as a form of informational parasite. They colonize human neural pathways and compel behaviors that serve the meme's replication rather than the human host's well-being. The human communication network they called Internet appears to have been the perfect transmission medium for these parasites. Tpar's eyebrow climbed even higher. You're suggesting humans are controlled by ideas? Not just ideas, Dr. Dex corrected enthusiastically, but self-replicating information packages optimized for transmission rather than accuracy. Explains so much about human inconsistency. Their behavior isn't guided by logic or even consistent emotion, but by competing colonies of mimetic parasites. Before Tpar could respond, Dr. Xylith quickly intervened. Thank you, Dr. Dex. Perhaps we should move on to our next theory? Dr. Kvoth, a stocky Klingon scientist, stepped forward, looking somewhat uncomfortable in his Science Academy uniform. Despite the Federation Klingon Scientific Exchange Program being well into its fourth decade, Kvoth was still only the third Klingon to join the Academy's permanent research staff. My team approaches the human paradox from a quantum physics perspective, he growled, his deep voice reverberating through the chamber. We call it quantum chaos motivation theory. The display shifted again to show incomprehensibly complex equations alongside brain scans. Unlike all other known sentient species, human neurological processes appear to incorporate quantum uncertainty at a macroscopic level. Where most beings operate on relatively predictable cause and effect decision-making, humans incorporate true randomness into their cognitive functions. Kvoth thumped his fist against his chest in the traditional Klingon salute to a worthy adversary. It is a brilliant evolutionary strategy. While we Klingon embrace chaos in battle, humans have evolved to embody chaos in their very thoughts. It makes them impossible to predict, impossible to counter strategically. In a dangerous universe, maximum unpredictability is a powerful survival trait. The Tellarite representative leaned forward. Are you seriously proposing that humans evolved to be illogical as a defense mechanism? Not illogical, Kvoth corrected with a toothy grin. Quantum logical. Their thought patterns include superpositions of conflicting motivations, collapsed only at the moment of action by environmental observation. It explains why human behavior changes when they know they are being watched. The committee was now showing signs of clear discomfort. Dr. Xylith quickly moved on again. And our third main theory is presented by Dr. Valen. A wizened Badran with elaborate earring jewelry stepped forward. Unlike the previous two researchers, Dr. Valen moved with deliberate slowness, and when he spoke, his voice was soft, requiring the committee members to lean forward. I offer what my colleagues consider a somewhat unorthodox perspective, he began with a gentle smile. After extensive analysis of human mythological systems, philosophical frameworks, and observed behaviors, I propose what I call the board creator experiment hypothesis. Several committee members exchanged glances as the display shifted to show various human religious symbols, artistic representations, and complex behavioral models. Humans display a level of internal contradiction that defies natural evolutionary processes. They are simultaneously the most compassionate and most cruel species we've encountered. They create breathtaking beauty and appalling destruction, often within the same individual and sometimes in the same act. They are capable of both rigorous logic and profound intuitive leaps that bypass logic entirely. Dr. Valen's eyes twinkled. My hypothesis is that humans were created as an experiment by some transcendent entity, call it what you will, that deliberately designed them with maximum internal contradiction to see what would happen. They are, in essence, a cosmic experiment in seeing how a sentient species would develop if it contained all possible traits in constant tension. At this, the committee chair raised a hoof. Dr. Xylith, while the Federation respects religious perspectives, this hardly seems like a scientifically testable hypothesis. With respect, Chair Grasnik, Dr. Valen interjected softly. My theory makes several testable predictions about human adaptability in novel situations that neither evolutionary models nor standard psychological frameworks can account for. We've designed experimental protocols. Yes, thank you, Dr. Xylith interrupted, sensing the committee's patience wearing thin. Perhaps we should move on to our experimental findings from the past year. Without waiting for a response, she changed the display to show a series of experimental setups. We've conducted several controlled experiments to test aspects of each theory. For example, to investigate the mimetic transmission hypothesis, we expose volunteers from 17 non-human species to a continuous stream of what humans call cat videos, a particularly virulent form of mimetic content, according to our analysis of the starter kit. The display showed various aliens sitting in laboratory conditions, watching screens displaying Earth felines engaged in what appear to be ordinary cat behaviors. The results were unexpected. While most subjects showed mild amusement or confusion, approximately 23% developed what can only be described as an obsessive interest in these videos. A Kaition researcher had to be removed from the study after attempting to transmit copies to the entire Kaition homeworld in violation of experimental protocols. Dr. Xylith rapidly moved to the next slide before the committee could inquire further. We also attempted to establish baseline logical processing in human cognition by having a human volunteer group solve basic logical puzzles while monitored. As you can see from these results, the display showed a chaotic scatter plot with no discernible pattern. When presented with identical logical problems on different days, the same humans would solve them using entirely different approaches, sometimes arriving at the correct answer through verifiably incorrect methodologies. Several subjects correctly solved complex problems while providing explanations that had no relationship to the actual problem. The Vulcan representative's eyebrow was now so high it threatened to disappear into her hairline. Moving on, Dr. Xylith continued hastily. We conducted a chemical analysis of human comfort foods to determine if there were psychoactive compounds that might explain emotional self-regulation patterns. Our findings indicated that many of these foods contain no special chemical properties beyond basic nutrition, yet humans insist they have profound emotional effects. She paused, her antennae drooping slightly. One research team became so frustrated with these results that they consumed a human comfort food called ice cream in massive quantities. They reported feeling better despite the substance containing nothing but simple carbohydrates, fats, and artificial flavors. 3 researchers had to be treated for lactose intolerance, a condition they had never previously displayed. The conference room had grown very quiet. In conclusion, Dr. Xylith said, straightening her posture, while we haven't reached definitive conclusions about human psychology, we've succeeded in cataloging a wider range of contradictions than previously documented. We've also, unfortunately, observed a concerning trend among our research staff. New images appeared on the display showing various alien researchers exhibiting distinctly human-like behaviors. A Vulcan chuckling at a datapad, a Tellarite apologizing profusely, a Betazoid wearing sunglasses indoors and claiming to need me time. Prolonged exposure to human cultural artifacts and research subjects appears to be contagious. Staff rotations have been implemented, but the effect persists. Our department's personnel turnover rate has reached 43%, with researchers either requesting transfers due to epistemological distress or, more alarmingly, becoming so fascinated with humans that they abandon scientific objectivity entirely. Last month, I discovered an entire research team had secretly started a pizza night social gathering based on a human consumption ritual. Dr. Xylith took a deep breath. We are requesting a 15% budget increase to improve psychological support for our researchers and to expand our containment protocols for human cultural materials. Chair Grasnick looked deeply concerned. Containment protocols? For culture? Yes, Dr. Xylith replied with complete seriousness. We have reason to believe that certain human cultural elements may be mimetically hazardous to non-human cognition. The humans call it going viral. We believe they meant it literally. The silence that followed was profound. Finally, the committee chair spoke. We will take your budget request under advisement, Dr. Xylith. Please submit your full findings to the secure database. This session is concluded. As the committee filed out, Dr. Xylith heard the Tellarite representative mutter to the Vulcan, completely illogical. To her horror, she thought she saw the corner of Tapar's mouth twitch upward in what almost resembled a smile as she replied, "Fascinating, nonetheless." Dr. Xylith's antennae drooped completely. The human contagion was spreading faster than she had feared. The Great Hall of Commerce on Starbase 74 was in absolute chaos. This was not particularly unusual. Commerce, especially interspecies commerce, was rarely an orderly affair. But today the chaos had reached unprecedented levels. The reason? The grand opening of Authentic Human Experience, the newest and most ambitious business venture of Grand Nagus Blork. "Step right up," the Ferengi entrepreneur shouted over the din of the crowded hall, his enormous ears quivering with excitement, or possibly the anticipation of profit. "Experience the inexplicable wonders of Earth culture. Confuse your friends. Alarm your enemies. Be the first in your species to understand the incomprehensible." Behind him stretched an enormous complex that combined elements of what humans would recognize as a theme park, a shopping mall, and a particularly gaudy casino. The facade was decorated with a bewildering mixture of human cultural symbols, cowboy hats adjacent to samurai swords, Renaissance paintings next to neon signs, and classical columns supporting what appeared to be a replica of a 20th century fast food restaurant. "Is this accurate?" murmured a hesitant Balian tourist to his companion. "It seems excessive." "Authenticity guaranteed," Blork shouted, his preternaturally sharp hearing catching the doubt. "Every experience verified by genuine human consultants, fully licensed by the Federation Commerce Bureau." This last claim, while technically true, omitted the 17 pages of disclaimers, exceptions, and qualifications attached to the license, including the notation that the human consultants had repeatedly quit in frustration only to be replaced by increasingly desperate recruits from the margins of human society. A considerable crowd had gathered for the opening, representing dozens of Federation species and even some from beyond Federation borders. Interspecies commerce had exploded in unexpected ways following humanity's entrance into the galactic community. While humans represented only a tiny fraction of the Federation's population, their cultural and commercial impact had been wildly disproportionate. Taste the legendary energy drinks that power human innovation. Blore continued, gesturing to a garish booth where a bored-looking Antarian was dispensing bright blue liquid from taps shaped like lightning bolts. Experience the mind-altering effects that inspired human technological leaps. What Blork failed to mention was that the beverages contained only a fraction of the caffeine found in genuine human energy drinks. After 3 Andorians had been hospitalized during market testing, Federation health regulations had required significant modification of the formula. The current version was essentially colored sugar water with a mild stimulant effect, though the packaging still featured humans engaged in inexplicable extreme sports activities. Immerse yourself in human entertainment. Feel the emotions they call adrenaline rush and jump scare in our simulator rides. The entertainment section of the complex was already drawing long lines. While holographic entertainment was standard throughout the Federation, human narrative structures had proven oddly compelling to many non-human species. The unpredictable plot twists, illogical character motivations, and bizarre emotional arcs that characterize human stories were so different from the traditional narratives of other cultures that they created a novel form of engagement. The humans came up with a term for what they call narrative dopamine hits, Blork had explained to his investors. They're neurochemically addictive. And best of all, we have the exclusive license to reproduce 73% of the entertainment section of the Humanity Starter Kit. None of the investors had thought to ask who held the rights to the other 27%. Near the back of the crowd, partially concealed behind a decorative potted plant of dubious Terran authenticity, stood a small group of sharply dressed aliens observing the proceedings with varying expressions of dismay. "This is a disaster," hissed Arandis Lore, a Trill financial attaché to the Federation Commerce Bureau. "Do you see the coffee bar they've installed? The replication pattern is completely wrong. Real human coffee would never have that purple iridescence." The iridescence is the least of our problems, replied her colleague, a Gray's named Modron. I've reviewed their financial structure. They're using a human economic model called a pyramid scheme, apparently without realizing that humans designed it specifically to collapse. Intentional financial collapse? What would be the purpose of such a system? Asked the third member of their group, a bewildered Vulcan trade administrator. Exactly, Arandis exclaimed. That's what we've been trying to explain about human economics for the past 15 years, Sovok. They sometimes deliberately create unstable financial instruments because they find the volatility exciting. Illogical, Sovok murmured, though his tone lacked the usual Vulcan certainty. Look, Modron said, gesturing with a hoof toward a side entrance where workers were wheeling in large crates. They're still bringing in merchandise. Perhaps we could get a better sense of what we're dealing with. The three officials made their way around the perimeter of the crowd toward the service entrance. Using their Federation credentials, they managed to gain access to the storage area behind the main complex. What they found did nothing to alleviate their concerns. The warehouse space was filled with crates containing what appeared to be millions of identical small plastic objects in various colors. What are these? Arandis asked, picking up one of the items, a green plastic rectangle with protrusions on one side. A human worker, passing by with a hover dolly, paused. Those? They're called Lego bricks. Apparently, they're some kind of ancient human cognitive development tool. The Ferengi think they're going to be the next big thing across the quadrant. Cognitive development? For children. For everyone, according to the marketing materials. Humans of all ages use them to build models and develop spatial reasoning or something. I don't really get it myself. The worker moved on, leaving the three officials staring at the mountains of plastic bricks. They've invested approximately 63 million Federation credits in these objects, Modron said quietly, checking his datapad. That's roughly 12% of their total capital investment. But what do they do? Sovok asked, turning the brick over in his slender fingers. They connect to each other to build structures, Arandis explained, having read some of the documentation on human recreational activities. It's a physical construction system that predates holographic modeling, essentially an analog predecessor to our standard architectural design programs. And they believe other species will pay for obsolete technology? Sovok's eyebrow rose sharply. The appeal is apparently not the technology, but the tactile experience and creative potential, Arandis said, though she sounded doubtful herself. Their investigation was interrupted by a commotion from the main hall. Rushing back, they found the opening ceremony in disarray. A crowd had gathered around the authentic human cuisine section, where several patrons appeared to be in various states of distress. It burns, a Balian was shouting, his blue face turning an alarming shade of purple. Is it supposed to burn? Yes, shouted a human woman behind the counter, looking exasperated. That's what spicy means. It's a good burn. My universal translator must be malfunctioning, gasped a Vulcan patron nearby, desperately gulping water. Pain cannot logically be a desirable taste sensation. The human server threw up her hands. Look, I tried to warn the management that most species don't have the same capsaicin receptors as humans, but would they listen? No, they insisted on authentic human spice levels. Elsewhere in the hall, similar scenes were unfolding. A group of Tellarites were arguing vociferously with the proprietor of human handshakes and physical greetings, apparently offended by the suggestion that their traditional greeting of insults should be replaced by physical contact. At the Earthsports simulator, a Kaitian had become entangled in what appeared to be a volleyball net, while an Andorian was expressing confusion about the concept of home runs in baseball. This can't possibly generate sustainable profit, Modron observed, tapping notes into his datapad as he watched the chaos unfold. Perhaps not directly, Arandis replied thoughtfully. But look there. She pointed to where the Grand Nagus was engaged in quiet conversation with representatives from several major Federation manufacturing consortiums. Despite the apparent calamity of the public opening, Blork was smiling broadly, and the corporate representatives appeared keenly interested in whatever he was saying. I suspect this public venue is merely a demonstration platform, Arandis continued. The real profit lies in licensing human concepts to established businesses throughout the Federation. Such as these plastic bricks? Sovok asked, still holding the Lego piece he had picked up. Among other things, human approaches to entertainment, food, fashion, they're all novel enough to create new market opportunities. The Ferengi aren't selling human products. They're selling human disruption of established markets. As if to underline her point, a tremendous crash echoed through the hall as an anti-gravity demonstration of human extreme sports went dramatically awry. Rather than causing concern, this appeared to generate excitement among the spectators, with many rushing forward to try the clearly dangerous activity themselves. Most peculiar, Sovok observed. The malfunction appears to have increased consumer interest. Exactly, Arandis sighed. That's the human commercial paradox in action. Failure becomes attraction. Discomfort becomes experience. Danger becomes entertainment. It defies all standard market theory, which is precisely why established businesses are desperate to understand and harness it. So despite appearances, this venture will succeed? Modern asked, looking confused. It will almost certainly go bankrupt within 6 months, Arandis replied with a grim smile. But before it does, it will spawn 100 imitators and fundamentally disrupt markets across 6 sectors. The Nagus will lose this investment, but make 10 times as much from the consulting contracts he's negotiating right now. I don't understand, Sovok admitted. A rare concession for a Vulcan. That's exactly the point, Arandis said. None of us understand. And that's what they're really selling. The promise of understanding humans and their bizarre commercial psychology. Whether anyone ever actually achieves that understanding is secondary to the pursuit itself. As if to punctuate her assessment, Grand Nagus Blork's voice rose above the din once more. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. The exclusive, never-before-seen, authentic human tradition of Black Friday shopping simulation. Experience the thrill of competitive acquisition resource management. The doors to a previously cordoned section burst open, revealing shelves of random merchandise. What followed could only be described as controlled chaos as patrons rushed forward, caught up in the inexplicable excitement of obtaining objects whose purpose and value they did not understand, driven by nothing more than the enthusiasm of the crowd itself. Mercantile mass hysteria, Modern observed. Fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. Welcome to human economics, Arandis replied dryly. I suggest we retreat to a safe distance. As the 3 officials edged toward the exit, Sovok finally placed the small green brick carefully on a nearby surface. Perhaps, he admitted quietly, there is a certain logic to a logic that we have yet to comprehend. The starship USS Improbable hung in stationary orbit above Gamma Hydra 4, a Class M planet that had recently applied for Federation membership. The ship was the pride of Starfleet's diplomatic corps, specifically designed for first contact and diplomatic missions with a multi-species crew carefully selected to represent the diversity of the Federation. On the bridge, Captain Terrell, a Vulcan with over 60 years of exemplary service, was experiencing an emotion that, were she less disciplined, might have been identified as acute frustration. Mr. Singh, she said, her voice maintaining its perfect Vulcan evenness despite the chaos unfolding around her. Would you please explain, once again, why you felt it necessary to engage the planetary defense system in what you termed a friendly wager? Lieutenant Commander Amir Singh, the ship's tactical officer and one of only 3 humans aboard the Improbable, had the grace to look somewhat abashed, though not nearly as much as Captain Terrell thought appropriate to the situation. Well, Captain, he began, running a hand through his neatly trimmed beard. During the cultural exchange portion of the diplomatic reception, I was discussing security protocols with General Kraz, their head of planetary defense. He seemed, a bit smug about their system's impenetrability. I might have suggested that it wasn't quite as foolproof as he believed. And this led to you challenging the General to attempt to penetrate our shields, while you attempted to bypass their defense grid, Terrell stated rather than asked. One elegant eyebrow raised a precise 5.2 millimeters. It seemed like a good way to build mutual respect, Singh offered with a hopeful smile. In human military traditions, these kinds of challenges often— I'm familiar with human military traditions, Commander, Tyrell interrupted, a sure sign of her disquiet. What I find difficult to comprehend is why you believe such traditions would be appropriate in a diplomatic first contact scenario with a species whose psychological profile explicitly notes their cultural tendency toward suspicion of outsiders. Before Singh could respond, the communications officer, Lieutenant Zres, a feathered avian from Cygnus 3, chirped urgently. Captain, incoming transmission from the planetary government. It's President Mokhtab himself. Tyrell squared her shoulders. On screen, the view screen flickered to life, revealing the imposing figure of President Mokhtab. The gamma hydrons were a reptilian species with iridescent scales and elaborate facial crests that changed color with their emotional state. Currently, the president's crest was a deep crimson shot through with bright yellow, colors not referenced in the xenobiological briefing materials. Captain Tyrell, the president began, his voice a resonant hiss. It seems your tactical officer has exposed critical vulnerabilities in our defense systems that our engineers assured me did not exist. Tyrell prepared her most diplomatic apology, but before she could speak, the president's crest shifted colors, bleeding from crimson to a vibrant purple. This is the most exciting thing that has happened on Gamma Hydra in 7 generations, Mokhtab exclaimed, displaying a mouthful of sharp teeth in what the crew belatedly recognized as a smile. General Kraz is already implementing the counterintuitive solutions your Commander Singh suggested. To think our engineers have been approaching shield harmonics from an entirely too logical perspective all these years. Tyrell blinked, possibly the only outward sign of surprise she had displayed. In the past decade, I am pleased that you found the exercise valuable, President Mokhtab, she managed. Valuable? It's revolutionary. General Kraz has submitted an official request to establish an ongoing security exchange program with your Starfleet. We had concerns about joining your Federation, fears that our cultural identity would be subsumed, but your Commander Singh has demonstrated that the Federation embraces diverse approaches, even ones that defy conventional procedure. The transmission ended with promises of an elaborate feast to celebrate the new friendship between Gamma Hydra 4 and the Federation, leaving the bridge crew of the improbable in stunned silence. Captain Tyrell turned slowly to face Lieutenant Commander Singh, who was now sporting an expression that, on a human, could only be described as smugly vindicated. It seems, Tyrell said carefully, that your unorthodox approach has yielded unexpected positive outcomes, Commander. Thank you, Captain, Singh replied, admirably restraining a full grin to merely a satisfied smile. Sometimes you have to go with your gut. Your gut, Tyrell repeated, as if testing an unfamiliar and potentially hazardous term. Human expression means following instinct rather than pure logic. I am familiar with the phrase, Commander. I am merely contemplating its implications for Starfleet protocol. This was not, in fact, an isolated incident. Throughout the Federation Starfleet, similar scenarios were playing out with increasing frequency. As human officers had integrated into previously homogeneous crew compositions, standard operating procedures that had remained unchanged for decades were being challenged, circumvented, or outright ignored, often with unpredictable results. At Starfleet headquarters on Earth, Admiral Chorzak of the Operations Division stood before a wall of holographic displays showing various statistical analyses of mission outcomes over the past 15 years. The Tellarite Admiral's bristly brow was furrowed in evident confusion. I don't understand these patterns, he grumbled to his aide, a human lieutenant commander named Fatima Rodriguez. The success rates for first contact missions have increased by 23%, but procedural violations have increased by 78%. Diplomatic incident reports are up 42%, yet alliance formation is up 31%. None of this makes statistical sense. If I might offer an observation, sir, Rodriguez ventured, The data shows a strong correlation between missions that experience procedural anomalies and positive outcomes. Are you suggesting that violating Starfleet protocols leads to success? The Admiral asked incredulously, his snout twitching with indignation. Not exactly, sir. But the data indicates that adaptability and improvisation in response to unique circumstances correlates strongly with mission success. And the ships with the highest rates of both procedural variance and mission success are those with the most diverse crew compositions, particularly those with human officers in key positions. Admiral Chorzok harumphed loudly, a sound that in Tellarite society could indicate anything from profound agreement to absolute dismissal. In this case, it seemed to fall somewhere in the confused middle. The Academy curriculum may need adjustment, he finally admitted, the words clearly difficult for him. The current emphasis on procedural adherence was developed during a period when crews were more homogeneous, with greater species diversity, particularly with the inclusion of humans in their creative approaches to problem-solving. We may need to incorporate more flexibility into our training. I believe some instructors are already moving in that direction, sir, Rodriguez replied, bringing up another display showing Starfleet Academy's curriculum evolution. There are now courses on adaptive crisis response and cross-cultural problem-solving methodologies that weren't offered 5 years ago. The Admiral's eyes narrowed as he spotted a particular entry on the list. Unorthodox solutions in no-win scenarios, taught by Professor James T. Kirk. What kinds of officers is that going to produce? Effective ones, according to the statistics, sir, Rodriguez answered with a carefully neutral expression. Across the quadrant on the edge of the neutral zone, the USS Empirical, a science vessel on a routine stellar cartography mission, was experiencing what its chief engineer colorfully described as a catastrophic cascade failure of the primary power distribution network. Commander Vorix, the Vulcan first officer, stood in engineering, watching with barely concealed alarm as Lieutenant Murray Davidson, the human chief engineer, attacked the ship's exposed power distribution node with what appeared to be a large hammer. Lieutenant, Vorix said with strained patience, I must once again insist that this approach contradicts all Starfleet engineering protocols. For power system failures, the manual clearly states. With all due respect, Commander, Davidson interrupted, pausing mid-swing. The manual was written by people who never had to deal with an Aldebaran power fluctuation interfering with a Romulan-adjacent gravimetric distortion while running on a software patch that hasn't been properly tested. Sometimes you've got to improvise. Before Vorix could respond, Davidson brought the hammer down on a specific junction with surprising precision. The engineering bay, which had been illuminated only by emergency lighting for the past hour, suddenly blazed back to full illumination as systems throughout the ship hummed back to life. Davidson grinned broadly as he set down the hammer. See? Percussive maintenance. Old Earth engineering tradition. You hit the distribution node with a blunt instrument, Vorix stated flatly, and this corrected a complex power failure that the computer was unable to diagnose. The power coupling was stuck due to thermal expansion from the gravimetric distortion, Davidson explained, wiping his hands on a rag. The manual procedure would have taken 6 hours of progressive power downs and component replacements. Sometimes a good whack in exactly the right spot is all you need. He patted the machinery affectionately. She just needed a little persuasion. You assigned a female gender pronoun to the ship's power distribution system, Vorix noted, his confusion evident despite his Vulcan control. Another old Earth tradition, Davidson said with a wink. Sailors used to call their ship she. Sign of respect. Vorix's mouth opened and closed once before he regained his composure. I shall note the effectiveness of your approach in my report, Lieutenant, though I must advise against making this procedure standard. Oh, it's already standard, Commander, Davidson replied cheerfully. Just not in the official manual. There's the Starfleet way, and then there's how things actually get done in a crisis. Ask any engineer in the fleet. As Vorix departed engineering with a slightly faster pace than his usual measured stride, he encountered Captain TPRYN in the corridor. The power systems have been restored, he reported. Lieutenant Davidson employed in Unorthodox solution. Did he hit something with a hammer again? The captain asked with what, for a Vulcan, constituted a sigh. Affirmative. The lieutenant refers to the technique as percussive maintenance. He claims it is a traditional Earth engineering practice. I'm aware, Captain TPRYN replied. This is the third time this month that unconventional human methodologies have proven effective when standard procedures failed. It is concerning. Concerning that they are effective, or concerning that our standard procedures are inadequate? Vorix inquired. The captain considered this for a moment. Both. Starfleet Command has requested a comprehensive report on all incidents of procedural deviation resulting in unexpected success. I believe they are contemplating significant changes to operational protocols. Such changes would represent a fundamental shift in Starfleet's approach to standardization, Vorix observed. Indeed, and yet, the data is compelling. Ships with diverse crews, particularly those with human officers in key positions, consistently outperform more homogeneous crews in crisis situations, despite higher rates of procedural violations. Fascinating, Vorix murmured. Perhaps there is a certain logic to human illogic that we have yet to fully comprehend. Captain TPRYN raised an eyebrow at her first officer. Be careful, Commander. That almost sounded like an expression of sentiment. Merely a hypothetical observation based on emerging data, Vorix replied stiffly. I shall include Lieutenant Davidson's technique in my report, along with its effectiveness. As the two Vulcan officers continued down the corridor, neither mentioned what both had privately observed, that with each passing year in service alongside humans, their own decision-making had become subtly but measurably less rigidly adherent to logical protocols. And strangest of all, neither could conclusively determine whether this represented degradation or evolution of their cognitive processes. At Starfleet Academy on Earth, a heated debate was underway in the faculty lounge. At the center of the controversy was a proposed new course, Improvisation in Crisis, the human approach to no-win scenarios. This is absolutely unacceptable, declared Professor Zvorna, an elderly Andorian who had taught tactical theory for over 40 years. We cannot institutionalize procedural violations and call it education. The whole point of Starfleet is to create a standardized, reliable approach to space exploration and defense. But the data is irrefutable, countered Dr. Jefferson Williams, the human professor who had proposed the course. Crews that demonstrate flexibility in applying regulations consistently outperform those that adhere rigidly to protocol. We're not teaching students to ignore procedures. We're teaching them to know when adaptation is necessary. You're teaching chaos, Zvorna retorted, her antennae quivering with indignation. The debate was interrupted by the arrival of Admiral Shuron, the Academy superintendent. The aged Vulcan's expression was, as always, impassive, but there was a certain tension in his bearing that silenced the room. I have reviewed the course proposal, he announced without preamble, as well as the longitudinal data on mission outcomes that Dr. Williams has provided. The course has been approved. A murmur of surprise ran through the assembled faculty. Admiral Shuron was known as a traditionalist, even by Vulcan standards. Additionally, the Admiral continued, all faculty will be required to attend a seminar on adaptive protocol implementation before the next academic year. It has become evident that Starfleet's success in an increasingly complex interstellar environment requires a more flexible approach than we have historically employed. As the Admiral turned to leave, Professor Zvorna called after him. Sir, with all due respect, this represents a fundamental shift away from the principles upon which Starfleet was founded. Admiral Shuron paused at the door. On the contrary, Professor, the principal aim of Starfleet has always been effective exploration, diplomacy, and when necessary, defense. The methods by which we achieve those aims must evolve as circumstances require. He turned, fixing the Andorian with a steady gaze. Logic dictates adaptation, Professor, even when that adaptation incorporates elements we find counterintuitive. As the door closed behind the Admiral, The faculty lounge erupted into heated discussion. Dr. Williams found himself surrounded by colleagues, some supportive, others skeptical, all demanding further explanation of how exactly one taught human-style improvisation as an academic discipline. That's just it, Williams tried to explain to a particularly skeptical Tellarite professor. It's not about throwing out the rulebook. It's about understanding that the rulebook was written based on past experiences, not future challenges. Humans don't ignore procedures because we're undisciplined. We adapt them because we recognize that no procedure can anticipate every scenario. But without standardized responses, how can we predict outcomes or ensure consistent performance? The Tellarite demanded. William smiled. That's exactly the point. In an infinite universe, unpredictability is the only certainty. Our greatest strength isn't rigid consistency. It's creative adaptation to the inevitability of the unexpected. The Tellarite harumphed loudly, but seemed to be considering the human's words with greater seriousness than his gruff demeanor suggested. Across the lounge, a young Vulcan instructor named Tvara was engaged in quiet conversation with an older human colleague, Professor Emeritus Helena Chun. I confess, Tvara said in a low voice, that I find myself intrigued by the possibilities of this new approach. My own experiences aboard the USS Tenacity included several instances where the human captain's departure from standard procedure resulted in unexpectedly positive outcomes. It's not an easy thing to teach, Professor Chen acknowledged. It requires a certain comfort with uncertainty that many species, including some humans, find challenging. But the most successful officers I've known have all shared that capacity to see regulations as guidelines rather than absolutes. A most un-Vulcan perspective, Tvara observed, and yet not entirely incompatible with logical principles. If the goal is optimal outcomes, and the data suggests that adaptive approaches produce superior results in complex situations, then logic would dictate embracing such approaches. Professor Chen smiled gently. The universe seldom presents us with problems that fit neatly into our preconceived categories. Perhaps the most logical response is to acknowledge that limitation and prepare accordingly. Tvara nodded thoughtfully. Indeed, a most human insight. The older professor's smile widened. Coming from a Vulcan, I'll take that as high praise. Across the quadrant, the Federation's diplomatic corps was experiencing its own paradigm shift, though with considerably less academic detachment and considerably more practical urgency. Chancellor Zorp of the Bureau of Interstellar Relations had been in his position for 15 standard years, and for at least 10 of those years, he had been dealing with what his staff euphemistically referred to as human-originated diplomatic anomalies, or, in less formal settings, Earthling incidents. Today, he was facing one of the more perplexing examples to date. Let me understand this correctly, Zorp said, his normally melodious Deltan voice strained with barely suppressed frustration. Ambassador Oren told the Rigelian Supreme Conclave that their traditional greetings ceremony reminded him of a yoga class at a retirement home. Not exactly, Chancellor, his aide replied nervously. The ambassador said it reminded him of hot yoga for octogenarians, which was apparently a reference to a human exercise practice. The Rigelians were not offended, as we initially feared. In fact, they were so intrigued by the concept that they've requested a cultural exchange program focusing on human physical fitness regimens for their elderly population. Chancellor Zorp blinked his large, opalescent eyes slowly. They want to exercise like humans? Because our ambassador made what should have been a deeply insulting comparison during the most sacred moment of their diplomatic protocol? Yes, sir. It seems the Supreme Conclave interpreted it as Ambassador Oren recognizing a deeper spiritual connection between their traditions and human wellness practices. They're now hailing him as unusually insightful for a non-Rigelian. Zorp leaned back in his chair, absently running a hand over his smooth, hairless head. This is the third time this month that what should have been a disastrous diplomatic misstep has somehow resulted in strengthened relations. I'm beginning to suspect there is a pattern here that we're missing. Sir, his aide ventured cautiously, I've been compiling data on diplomatic incidents involving human negotiators over the past decade. Would you like to see the analysis? By all means, Zorp sighed. Perhaps it will provide some insight into this madness. The aide activated a holographic display above Zorp's desk, showing a complex series of charts and graphs. As you can see, sir, incidents of protocol violations by human diplomats are approximately 312% higher than the Federation average. However, the aide highlighted another section of the display. Successful treaty ratifications, trade agreements, and alliance formations involving human negotiators are 276% higher than the average for all other species combined. That makes no statistical sense, Zorp protested. Diplomatic success should correlate with protocol adherence. That has been the operating assumption of the Bureau for over 2 centuries, the aide agreed. But the data suggests otherwise, at least where humans are involved. What's even more interesting is this trend. The display shifted to show a comparison between different diplomatic teams. Mixed species teams that include at least one human consistently outperform both all-human teams and non-human teams in complex negotiations. It appears that the combination of traditional diplomatic approaches with what humans call thinking outside the box produces optimal results. Thinking outside what box? Zorp asked, confusion evident in his voice. It's a human idiom for unconventional problem solving, the aide explained. The box represents standard parameters or expectations. Zorp stared at the data for several long moments. Are you suggesting that we should deliberately incorporate protocol violations into our diplomatic strategy? Not exactly, sir. But perhaps we should consider more flexible approaches to traditional diplomatic frameworks, especially in complex or historically challenging situations. Chancellor Zorp was saved from having to respond to this heretical suggestion by the chime of his communication system. Chancellor, we're receiving an urgent transmission from Ambassador Trell on Andoria. She reports that the trade negotiations have reached an unexpected breakthrough following what she describes as an unorthodox intervention by Attaché Santiago. What did the human do now? Zorp asked with resignation. Apparently, after 3 days of deadlock, he suggested that the Andorian and Tellarite delegations settle their dispute with something called a dance-off. A what? A competitive dance ritual, sir. Both species took it as a challenge to their honor. The competition lasted for 7 hours and ended with all parties sharing alcoholic beverages and signing the trade agreement with terms more favorable than our original objectives. Chancellor Zorp stared at his aide for a long moment, then slowly lowered his head until his forehead rested on his desk. Sir, the aide inquired tentatively. Are you all right? I am contemplating, Zorp replied without raising his head. The possibility that the entire foundation of interstellar diplomacy as we have practiced it for 3 centuries might be fundamentally flawed. Or, alternatively, that humans are simply operating on principles so alien to conventional understanding that they might as well be from another universe entirely. There's a third possibility, the aide suggested. Perhaps effective diplomacy has always involved elements of spontaneity and genuine connection that are highly formalized approaches have gradually eliminated. Humans, being relatively new to interstellar relations, haven't had time to lose those elements to institutionalization. Zorp slowly raised his head. That is a surprisingly insightful observation, and a disturbing one. It suggests that our entire diplomatic corps has been systematically training out the very qualities most conducive to successful negotiation. Not entirely, sir. Many of our most successful non-human diplomats display similar tendencies toward creative adaptation. They're simply more discreet about it than our human colleagues. The communications system chimed again. Chancellor, we're receiving reports of another incident on Tellar Prime. A human cultural attaché referenced something called a bacon cheeseburger during a formal dinner. The Tellarite delegation is demanding immediate access to the recipe and preparation techniques. Zorp sighed deeply. Establish a new department within the Bureau, the Division of Human Behavioral Interpretation and Diplomatic Anomaly Resolution. Staff it with our most adaptable personnel. And for the love of cosmic harmony, Give me a comprehensive analysis of this thinking outside the box concept. If humans can accidentally achieve diplomatic breakthroughs that our best professionals can't accomplish deliberately, we need to understand how and why. The aide nodded, making notes on his datapad. And regarding the Tellarite request, sir, contact Earth. Get them their bacon cheeseburger recipes. And maybe warn the Federation Health Ministry that they might want to prepare for potential Tellarite digestive emergencies. Given the species' already irascible nature, I shudder to think how they'll react to human cuisine. As his aide hurried away, Chancellor Zorp turned to gaze out his office window at the gleaming towers of the Federation diplomatic complex. For centuries, the Federation had prided itself on bringing order, structure, and predictability to interstellar relations. Now, humans were introducing an element of chaos that threatened to undermine that entire carefully constructed framework. And yet, the results spoke for themselves. Perhaps a little chaos was exactly what the Federation had been missing all along. The Committee for Cultural Assimilation Assessment had not originally been intended as a permanent institution. When it was established 25 years after humanity's entrance into the Federation, its mandate had been simple: evaluate the impact of human cultural elements on Federation society and provide recommendations for managing the integration process. That had been 40 years ago. Now, the CCAA was one of the most influential academic bodies in the Federation, with research divisions dedicated to everything from linguistic evolution to artistic expression, from culinary fusion to philosophical hybridization. Today, in the Grand Hall of the Federation Cultural Institute on Centauri Prime, the CCAA was presenting its fifth generational impact assessment, the most comprehensive analysis to date of humanity's influence on the greater Federation. Dr. Narapel, a spotted trill who had chaired the committee for the past decade, stood on the podium before a diverse audience of academics, government officials, and cultural practitioners from across the quadrant. The elegant hall was filled to capacity, with additional viewers joining via subspace transmission from dozens of worlds. Distinguished colleagues, Dr. Pell began, her voice carrying easily through the perfect acoustics of the hall. When the Humanity Starter Kit was first presented to the Federation Council 65 years ago, it was viewed primarily as a curiosity, an interesting but ultimately peripheral addition to the Federation's rich tapestry of cultural heritage. Soft laughter rippled through the audience at what was now recognized as perhaps the greatest underestimation in Federation history. What none could have predicted, Dr. Pell continued with a smile, was the disproportionate impact this relatively small collection of human cultural artifacts, historical records, scientific principles, artistic works, and media entertainment would have on virtually every aspect of Federation society. She gestured, and a holographic display materialized above the center of the hall, showing a complex network of interconnections between different cultural elements, species, and institutions across the Federation. Our research has identified over 12,000 significant cultural adaptations directly attributable to human influence, ranging from linguistic incorporation to philosophical evolution, technological innovation to artistic revolution. The effects have been so pervasive that many younger Federation citizens are unaware that certain aspects of their daily lives would have been completely alien to their ancestors a mere half-century ago. Dr. Pell highlighted specific nodes within the holographic display. Perhaps most striking are the religious and philosophical developments. We've documented the emergence of at least 73 new syncretic belief systems that incorporate elements from human mythologies and philosophical traditions. On Vulcan, for example, a growing movement within the discipline of Kalinar has incorporated concepts from human Zen Buddhism, creating what adherents call logical mindfulness, a practice that even the Vulcan High Council has acknowledged has produced measurable improvements in cognitive processing and emotional regulation. The display shifted to show artistic representations from various worlds. In the arts, we've seen the development of entirely new schools and movements, such as the Andorian chaotic abstraction that draws heavily on human expressionist techniques, or the Tellarite, human satirical realism, that applies human satirical concepts to traditional Tellarite confrontational aesthetics. Another shift in the display. Perhaps most visible in everyday life are the festivals and celebrations. Across the Federation, we now see adaptations of human holidays and traditions, often with fascinating local variations. The Balian version of Halloween, for instance, has evolved into a complex ritual of ancestral connection that bears only a passing resemblance to its Earth original. Yet participants explicitly acknowledge its human roots. Dr. Pell paused, a more serious expression crossing her face. Most profound, however, has been the linguistic impact. Federation Standard, once a carefully constructed and regulated linguistic framework, has become increasingly influenced by human language patterns, idioms, and even what humans call slang. Linguistic analysis indicates that approximately 38% of everyday Federation Standard now incorporates elements that would have been considered improper or informal just 50 years ago. Murmurs spread through the audience. Language was the foundation of culture, and changes to Federation Standard had implications for everything from legal documents to scientific publications. This linguistic evolution reflects a deeper shift in Federation thinking, Dr. Pell continued. The incorporation of human phrases like thinking outside the box, gut feeling, or taking a chance reflects the gradual adoption of cognitive approaches that emphasize intuition, creativity, and comfort with ambiguity alongside the more traditional values of logic, order, and precision. She gestured once more, and the holographic display transformed into a complex waveform. Our predictive models suggest that this process of cultural hybridization is not only continuing, but accelerating. As the first generation of Federation citizens raised entirely in this new hybrid culture comes of age, we anticipate even more profound transformations in the coming decades. Dr. Pell's expression became thoughtful. Some have expressed concern about this process, fearing the loss of traditional cultural elements or the undermining of established social structures. Our research suggests these fears are largely unfounded. Instead of replacement, we are seeing synthesis, the emergence of new cultural forms that preserve the core elements of traditional cultures while incorporating human approaches to adaptation, innovation, and expression. She looked out across the audience, meeting the eyes of the assembled dignitaries. In conclusion, after 65 years of human membership in the Federation, our assessment can be summarized as follows. The influence of humanity has been undeniably profound, deeply transformative, and ultimately unpredictable. We do not recommend any attempt to manage or restrict this process, as our data overwhelmingly indicates that the emergent hybrid culture is more adaptable, more creative, and ultimately more successful than its predecessor in addressing the complex challenges of our era. Dr. Pell paused, a slight smile touching her lips, or to express it in the increasingly popular vernacular of contemporary Federation Standard. Humanity has shaken things up, and it turns out that was exactly what we needed. The committee recommends continuing to observe this fascinating process of cultural evolution with an open mind and, dare I say, an open heart. The conclusion of her presentation was met with enthusiastic applause, a human custom that had, like so many others, become standard practice throughout the Federation. As attendees filed out of the Grand Hall into the Institute's atrium, they were greeted by a scene that perfectly illustrated Dr. Pell's findings. An Andorian wearing a t-shirt emblazoned with an ancient Earth meme image of a feline, a Tellarite restaurant serving level 7 spicy gag, and a public announcement that concluded with the once strange but now ubiquitous phrase, "Have a nice day." In a quiet corner of the atrium, an elderly Vulcan diplomat named Sorvok stood, observing the scene with an expression that, had he been less disciplined, might have been described as wistful. He was approached by Dr. Pell, who had noticed his solitary contemplation. "Ambassador Sorvok," she greeted him with a respectful nod. "I believe you were present at the initial presentation of the Humanity Starter Kit to the Federation Council, were you not?" "Indeed," the aged Vulcan confirmed. "I was a junior attaché to the Vulcan diplomatic mission at the time. I recall the Council's reaction quite clearly. Was there truly concern about human influence on Federation culture?" Pell asked curiously. Concern would be an emotional response. Sorvok replied with typical Vulcan reserve. However, there was significant discussion regarding potential complications arising from human membership. Their historical records indicated a species with remarkable adaptability, but also tremendous capacity for conflict and chaos. The council debated extensively whether humanity was sufficiently evolved for Federation membership. And yet they were admitted, Pell observed. Yes, the deciding factor, as I recall, was a speech by Earth's representative addressing these very concerns. She acknowledged humanity's tumultuous history, but argued that it was precisely this history that made humans valuable additions to the Federation. We bring to the table not the wisdom of unbroken success, she said, but the hard-earned lessons of our many failures. We offer not perfection, but the perfect example of how imperfection can drive growth. Sorvok's gaze swept across the diverse crowd mingling in the atrium. At the time, I found her argument illogical. Now, after 65 years of observation, I must concede that her assessment was remarkably prescient. Do you regret the decision to accept humanity into the Federation? Dr. Pell asked. The elderly Vulcan was silent for a long moment, considering the question with characteristic thoroughness. Regret is an emotional reaction to past events that cannot be changed, and therefore illogical, he finally replied. Then, with what might almost have been the ghost of a smile, he added, however, to use a human expression that has become surprisingly useful in diplomatic contexts, it has certainly made things more interesting. As Sorvok departed, Dr. Pell remained, watching the vibrant cultural exchange unfolding around her. The Federation had initially regretted asking what was in the Humanities Starter Kit, but that regret had long since transformed into something far more complex and ultimately more valuable. A new cultural synthesis greater than the sum of its parts. The transformation wasn't always smooth or predictable. It could be chaotic, confusing, occasionally even frightening in its implications. But it was undeniably alive with possibilities that the carefully ordered, logical Federation of the past could never have imagined. In the end, perhaps that was humanity's greatest gift to the galactic community. Not any specific cultural artifact or practice, but the simple reminder that the most interesting developments often emerge not from perfect order, but from the creative chaos of unexpected connections. That wisdom, once considered peculiarly human, was now becoming simply Federation.